All right, here we go. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are live. So, for those of you who are listening live, understand we are live on multiple platforms today. Welcome to another episode of the Black Mind Garden podcast live. And first of all, I'm just going to name that it can be rough and tough going live on like 5 platforms at once. So give us some grace. For those of you who are listening on the back end to the podcast audibly, um, you get to actually get the streamlined version of this. But I'm excited. I'm excited because I have a guest who was with me a few months ago, and we had a conversation both here live, and then she featured on the podcast, Black Mind Garden podcast. We talked about the incarcerated mind, and it was such an amazing conversation. We got a lot of engagement, a lot of feedback on it. Mandii Brown. And today we were, beforehand, we're like, well, we have so much to talk about. What do we want to talk about today? And we decided that our topic today would be the importance of acknowledging trauma and hurt in the church as a pathway to healing in our community. So, first of all, welcome, welcome, welcome back, Mandii. How are you? How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me back.
Yes, yes. It is so wonderful to have you back. And um, I'll say, you know, like I said, we got a lot of good feedback from our last conversation. And so for those of my audience though, who is maybe they may have newly joined the podcast, they may newly be listeners, I'd love for you to like fully introduce yourself, let us know who you are, what you do, and how you've come to do the work that you do now as a therapist.
So, my name is Mandii Brown, for those who don't know. I go by the Relatable Counselor. Currently, I am the cognitive behavior specialist for the men's and women's prison down here in Tennessee. I am a counselor myself at a Suboxone clinic on my later days. And I am currently starting my private practice, which will launch in the fall. So, yeah.
Congratulations. I didn't know that part. That's new
Yeah,
information. I know, right?
surprise.
It's so funny because as I have guests on, and especially as I bring guests back, because oftentimes, I mean, you all know me. If you've been listening to this podcast for a while, I love to bring guests back because especially when we have those really juicy, good conversations. And oftentimes, as I evolve, they evolve. And it's wonderful to see that happening live and in person. So thanks for being back on. Tell me, how have you been since our last podcast? What's been going on besides getting ready to launch your own practice?
It's been very, very busy. I've joined a couple coalitions down here because I'm really big on the Black and Brown community.
That's right.
Um, we did, as my platform, where what happened was we've done the Napier Day Parade and Block Party, which is in the low come community, and pour
Mm-hmm.
it back into them. I've been doing a lot of different workshops. I've done a couple of speaking engagements. I actually have two coming up, one for the Tennessee Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse, and also for Black Mental Health Village, which is
Mm-hmm.
similar to Black Mental Health Alliance, but the
Mm-hmm.
village portion is down here. So, yes. What else I've been doing? Money mode, of course, that takes up all my time as usual.
Yes, yes, indeed. One of the things I really love about you is how much community involvement you have, how much work in the community you do, and how many ripples of impacts that you're making. And you probably don't even realize the level of impact to which you're making because you're so involved in all these various initiatives and communities. So I just want to really like give you your flowers and just like acknowledge you for that, like really boots on the ground, like really getting in the community. It's really beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, they're my target. Outside of the incarcerated population, you have to get acclimated back to society. So I'd rather know what society is doing so I can help you better on your journey to leave, of course. So,
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, that leads me to this topic. I mean, this topic of the church community, and I think it's just been taboo over time to talk about church hurt and church trauma. But I think that that more and more we're starting to acknowledge that. And I think it's so important because the church, the Black church in particular, is a very central part of community, for our culture, and like spiritual in various ways, like different denominations, different culturally different types of spiritual communities. And so the Black church has sort of been like the pillar of community. And what we don't talk about is the ways that trauma, is sort of swept under the rug. Things are swept under the rug. And we alluded to that in our last conversation when we talked about the incarcerated mind. And you have some personal experience with church hurt and church trauma. And so I'd love for you to kind of share, if you're willing to share a little bit about your experience, and let's kind of like start to unpack and then like move into like what are some of the solutions that we can start to bring to begin this healing process.
My own experience with church, at a younger age, I learned that if your spiritual life isn't as strong, that you're you're gonna fail, basically. That you're gonna fail mentally, emotionally. You're only supposed to depend on God, no one else. And so that kind of made a gap between me wanting, as growing up, wanting another person to assist in my mental downfall, so to speak.
Mhm.
So you're praying, you're crying, looking out, reaching out to God, but who else is there to help you physically in this
Right.
world?
Right.
And technically, you're supposed to be your pastor, but you gotta realize your pastor is also human. When at a younger age, you're looking at your pastor as someone who's pretty much next to God. And so when you see all these faults and flaws, and you're thinking that your spiritual life is just going to continue to crumble, and it goes down from there. But as I
Mhm.
got older, I learned to have my own spiritual walk, and also to know that I don't have to be in the church consistently to have a relationship with God, but I also know it is okay to have another person to talk to help ground me as I still build my spiritual walk with God. I can have both. It's okay to have both. I don't have to depend just on one. And that has always been a problem. Like my faith is still strong enough to get past everything, but I still need an extra assistance. And that's never preached. Now it's kind of preached along with other things to make it more, to make church more relatable. Because
Right.
now they're dipping and diving into the marijuana industries and politics and stuff like that. So I think the church is essential to the community because that's a pillar for us. We look to them for a lot of guidance, but they also need to have that mental health aspect as well to have some type of balance, like not just depend on them, a man-made thing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because my experience with my relationship with the church, with God, with spirituality in general, I've had like a very interesting journey in that
Yeah.
realm. So I was raised in multiple denominations over time. So I started out the first churches that I remember going to as a young person were the AME church. And so I was in the AME church for a while my mom was married to this person, and we went to the AME church. And then when they split, we continued to go to the AME church for a while, but we then started to like look around for different churches. Like we went to Primitive Baptist Church,
Mhm.
Missionary Baptist Church. And then my mom married a Catholic man. So then we started to go to the Catholic church. I also, growing up in Huntsville, Alabama, at some point went to a private school for just like 1 year, and it was a Church of Christ school. So as you can imagine, I have had experience inside of many, many, many
Yes.
denominations inside of the Christian church, and have had an opportunity to listen to the nuances between denominations. And from a very young age, I questioned why there were so many denominations, right? So first of all, I think about church, I think about like the division that it causes amongst us
Mhm.
because of the denominations. And I didn't understand why. Well, Christianity is Christianity. Like, what's the deal with all of these various denominations? And so that led me in college. I was in a, after I graduated from, we went to the Catholic church until I graduated from high school. My mom was still married to the Catholic dude. And, and so I joined the gospel choir, and people from all denominations came together. And one of the things that I would often hear was these battles and debates, and one of the things I would often see would be people would come in on Friday nights for practice and would be like very, like catching the Holy Spirit, and then the
Yeah.
rest of the week they'd be doing something else that was not totally aligned with spiritual practice. And that led me to start to look outside of Christianity as a religion. And so as I went on this path, um, I remember being told by various people who were Christians how, like, I was going to hell. Like, just the kind of, right.
Man.
Right.
Man, I don't know how many times I heard that growing up. I'm like, I'm
Because
gonna
I
meet you
wasn't going
there.
to church. Right. Going to hell. Going to hell. And that was sort of like my first experience with this lashing out at me from a different, you know, and then my own desire to go and understand what is my relationship with God, and what is my relationship with the church. And I've like since come back around to be amenable to spiritual communities as long as they're aligned with my values, my spiritual values.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's so interesting. And then since then, I've talked to multiple people, including you, who um, who have experienced this sort of like trauma in the church. I have, a friend who has a child who is in the LGBTQI community, and the church essentially was not accepting of her, and she and had to leave that church. I've had, people who have had been assaulted, by members inside the church, and the church basically victimized the victim. I mean,
That's
um,
also been
yeah,
there.
yes,
Been there.
exactly. And then, sort of blamed the victim, blamed and shamed the
Mhm.
victim. And so I've heard a lot of stories from people inside of the church community who have been hurt, and it doesn't get talked about because, well, it's deemed as taboo. It's kind of like the Black family, you know, like what goes on inside the house.
Someone
Um,
asking, is that wrong? Is
is
what's
that wrong?
wrong?
Well,
Oh, that's just wrong. Yes.
that's just wrong. Yeah, that's just wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I interpreted. That's
Yeah.
just wrong. Yes. Um, and I think, you know, and you tell me what you think about this. The church is just like a macrocosm of the Black family.
Mhm.
And
Whew.
we know that in the Black, in as a collective in the Black family, stuff gets hidden and swept under the rug. Right.
Yep.
We and
Whew.
and it's, if you think about it historically, you can understand why, because we talked about this like in the days of enslavement. We had to like sweep things under the rug in order to not die. Right.
Yeah. Protect
So,
each other.
right.
But where do we draw that line in protecting each other and actually holding them accountable
Exactly.
without
Exactly.
dangling Jesus over top of them?
Exactly. Exactly. And, it part of that, this dangling of Jesus, and part of the, like we think about Christianity, and we go way even further back
Mm-hmm.
into the days before we were enslaved, when we were just chilling, doing our thing in Africa and our tribes, just and there were missionaries that came in, European missionaries that came in to teach us the word, the good
Yeah.
book, right? So we have essentially picked up spiritual practice from our oppressor, and a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the this, you're going to hell, and you know only Jesus Christ, or only this way, or is a function of keeping us in control. And then, we internalize that as a culture, and put our own practices to it that feel good, which is valid. But what we need to do is we need to begin to look at um, what is the root of this trauma and this hurt. You know what I'm saying? Okay, so we have
Oh
experienced
wow.
recently, I can see here, we've experienced recently more than 50 members are put out of the church for their spiritual growth. Yeah, that happens. That happens. That
Look,
definitely happens.
don't get me started on that. Okay,
Yeah.
we just had this discussion yesterday. We a lot of the women that I work with in the prisons look for Christian based halfway houses. And one of the halfway houses that one was interested in, I typically read the guidelines for. And it down to the T, it felt like a cult. And so it was like, first off, you have to pray before you do your interview. Do
Mhm.
your interview, background check. You can't have any medicines. You can only rely on Jesus. If you have any medical conditions that's not curable within the first few weeks of you being there, you can't be there because Jesus can't heal you. Like this is
Mhm.
all black and white on the internet. Um, you if your faith isn't strong by day 45, you're getting kicked out of the program. You have 30 minutes to pack up. They will take you to a shelter or a bus station. And like it goes on and it's like 3 pages, these type of rules. And it's like just like this, if someone's coming to you to get help, to get back on the right track, and then add in that spiritual background, why would you turn them away if their spiritual background is not to where you want it to be?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it's a matter of control. And what we have
Mm-hmm.
to recognize is that the ancestral trauma that was experienced that has led us to create the practices that we create, we need to manage that. We need to begin to
Yeah.
deal with that and unpack that because there's, you know, it is it's useful to have a spiritual it's great to have a spiritual relationship with God. It's useful. It's I would say necessary to have that spiritual, connection to God, the God of your understanding, whomever you call it, right? Like I um am admittedly not a no longer a an active member of the Christian church, and I
Mm-hmm.
respect the message of Jesus Christ, and I respect the message of the Prophet Muhammad, and I respect the message of like various spiritual teachers throughout history, right? And if we think about religion or religion in terms of us being on a boat with multiple windows, right? And then God being the sky and the sun, right? Then we're in different rooms and we're looking out all these various different windows and we're having different practices, but we're
Mm-hmm.
looking at the same sky. So, anyway, I digress. My point is, when we start to look at the history of how our practices came to be in all these various different denominations, and we start to really look at the trauma that is happening, look at the hurt that is happening, and start to really deal with that and unpack that and have real conversations for healing, then we can begin to create a much deeper and stronger spiritual community in whatever denomination or religion that we're practicing. And I do believe that, as you said, there are churches that are I would say we would call them more progressive churches that are
Mm-hmm.
beginning to really look at that. As a matter of fact, I have heard of a couple of churches here in the Atlanta area who are really starting to look at mental health, like really having conferences around mental health,
Good.
having um, conferences and speakers come in to unpack to talk about trauma and what that looks like. And I think and I think that as a Black community, period, we need to be looking at because we have so much of it.
How can you make your own rules? Um, I look at churches and denominations as a family sense, as you say.
Hmm.
Say we're all the denominations are children. We all grew up in the same house, right? And say we have this one father and he treats us all the same, but we perceive it differently. So I don't like this, so I'm gonna still have that main foundation but perceive it this way. Same thing for everyone.
Hmm.
And so typically that's kind of how the church makes up its rules.
Yeah.
um, if they don't like something that one denomination doing, they branch off make it their own, call it something. Those are rules, boom, and say this is still Christianity, but you have to follow these rules.
Right.
And then it grows into confusion. Well, who's right?
Yes. And if you think about it, like when you think about historically, the church
Mm-hmm.
historically, whose stipulation it says, okay, we are but they, so they said there are
Stipulations
stipulations according
according
to the teachings. All
teaching.
right. Whose stipulations are they?
Mm-hmm.
Whose teachings are they? And you could one might say, oh well, they're Jesus Christ's teachings. And who translated the book?
Bingo.
That's the
Who
thing.
translated it?
Who translated the book, right? Who created the King James, or who was King James?
Mm-hmm.
Who created King James? So we got to start to really think critically, think more deeply around who's translating these stories. When were they translated? And what was the intention behind each translation of the
Mm-hmm.
book? And that's not to, again, it's not to negate, like this is not a conversation to disparage the Christian church, and it is a conversation that we must have in our community about thinking more deeply about our practices, what we call our practices in worship, and our practice in how we treat each other, our belief systems. So, I always talk about this in my podcast, these filters that we look through, because we come up with different experiences, we have his different histories, and we listen through different filters, and we speak through different filters, and people listen to you through their filters, and people speak to you through their filters. So those people who are listening to this podcast right now are listening through their own filters based on their past experience, based on um, their upbringings, based on their beliefs, based on their values. And that's actually okay. And when we begin to, if we really want to shift and change the impact we're having in our community, and heal, we have to begin to look beyond what we have believed for so long and question our belief systems. And it can be scary to do that, right?
Yes. Because I mean, that's all you've known, even within the family household. That's all you've known, and you're deciding to breaking it down. It's like, okay, you're gonna find a lot of underlying issues with what you believe so far. And so,
Yeah. So, everyone, so this is, I think, as we talk about specifically, if as we talk about church trauma and church hurt, I would
mhm.
love to begin to look at, and I would love your input on this too. It's like, how do we now begin to heal? What are the pathways to healing church hurt and church trauma?
um, that's tricky because even though we've all, to some, I won't say all, but some of us to an extent have experienced it, we don't speak on it until we're comfortable enough. I'm like, oh my God, you too, you too,
Hmm.
you too. And I have my spiritual group of friends who've experienced stuff like that, and we validated each other's experiences and feelings, and then we agreed to have a brand new foundation to get closer
Yeah.
to God and our spiritual walk. So I think as a community, actually validating some of those experiences
Hmm.
and those childhood traumas within the church, and even as adults, like it's been mentioned before, your faith isn't strong enough, you get kicked out.
Hmm.
Just validating that stuff and stop hiding it and sweeping under the rug and saving face as a community. Just say it happened.
Hmm.
Let's fix it together,
Hmm.
heal together. And if you still choose to have that walk, have it, but in your own terms that fits you in Christ. Don't
Yeah.
keep trying to abide by something that doesn't align with you.
Yeah, I love that. This is something that you really pointed out that I think is very important, and that's acknowledge.
Yeah.
Like, just, naming stuff is very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. And even if we could just name, okay, there is a thing that exists called church trauma, called church hurt. right? So that's like the first step where they say in recovery programs, the first step to recovery is admission,
Yep.
right? So we got to like admit it, right?
We had denial later, but
Right, exactly. And I think too, the second thing you said that was super powerful, like admitting it, naming what it is. I think defining specifically, like, okay, this is what happens specifically. Like, this is the type, this is what the church trauma is that's happening, or this is the hurt that's happening. Will create, you said the comfort, right? The safety level. There's got to be a
yeah,
safety level to be able to talk about it before you can heal it. So the acknowledging of it, I think, begins to create that level of safety. It doesn't all the way do it, but it begins. It's like the acknowledgement, the acknowledgement of it is like, okay, at least we're talking about it now.
yeah.
But then there's got to be like more steps to create that safety. You have any feedback on that? Creating the safety part?
I only can speak from my experience, that I felt safety behind it when I knew that someone else experienced it that I didn't even know experienced it. I was like, oh my
Hmm.
God, you feel safe enough to confirm this with me.
Hmm.
Okay, so I'm not crazy.
Hmm.
And then it just grew. It's like a group of 5 of us. So it's like,
Hmm.
okay, you dealt with this, you dealt with this, you dealt with this. We never knew that it was we knew it was a thing, but didn't know it was a thing until it was said out loud.
Yeah.
And didn't know that they experienced it until it said out loud. And then once we found comfort in each other, I was like, okay, cool. Like, do
Yeah.
you agree to start from scratch? I agree to start from scratch. And then
Yeah.
it went from there.
I think in line with what you're saying, I think the more that, so first of all, I think the leadership of the church has to be willing also to acknowledge, because the church looks to the leaders of the church,
Yeah.
right? So the leaders of the church, the pastors, the deacons, the leaders, the whatever, however the ministry leaders, whomever, however the naming is, depending on the denomination, they have to be on board. They have to be willing to learn, right, and understand that um, this only strengthens the church. um, like in families, a lot of times we get nervous about conflict because we're afraid of breaking up the family. But if you can move through, when you can move through trauma together and heal trauma together, you create an even better connection. And you can strengthen as leaders, I believe, when you begin to learn and have the church learn about what trauma is, what it constitutes, and create different practices, then you actually are facilitating the healing of your church and a deeper connection of worship. And if you could, and that's, I would imagine that is the goal of most church leaders. Now, some church leaders, we know that may not be the goal, and
I was going to say that is an uphill battle because accountability as a leader in
mhm,
a church and then admitting that you're a human, which I don't know why that's so hard to do, but admitting that you're human, that you're wrong,
mhm.
or that the church did something as an entity to whoever or whatever kind of group of people, and wanting to fix it is always an issue. Always.
And so I think that's why the education is key.
Yeah.
The education is key. And I really do believe that there are places where this is starting to happen. There are
Hmm.
communities where this is starting to happen. But just like racism in general, oppression in general, this is a Titanic, and you don't just whip it around like a race car. Right?
I wish.
It's something that I think takes time and consistency. And I think the accountability gets created, for the leaders by the church. It's just like in a corporation. So I do anti-racism, anti-oppression work inside organizations and corporations. You have the
Mhm.
CEOs at the top, and who keeps the CEO accountable? Well, the consultants and then the community, like the SLT, the
Yeah.
senior leadership teams, their second in command keeps the CEO accountable as well. The board of directors, and I think churches have boards too, right? Many
Yes.
churches have board of directors. So the big ones do have board of directors when you have big organizations. So it's educating and having enough leadership on board that would be willing to keep the the big leadership, you know,
In
in
check.
accountable. Yeah, exactly. This is a this is a big conversation. And the truth is, there are no like final answers, right?
No, it's just there are steps that we can do, but I think the hardest part, especially being in the South and being a Black church in the South, is really just saying it without offending people and offending the congregation. Like, oh no, that was just you. Our leader didn't do this or do
Mhm.
that. Save it, sister. just, 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 just don't condemn somebody. Which I've noticed, don't condemn the person bringing forth the problem wanting a solution. Like,
Yeah.
address it. Even if you got to do it in private, fine. Address it
Hmm.
and then go from there. But we are in the South.
Well,
That
I
may
mean,
not happen.
here's the thing. I think that it's not we. It's a myth that this only happens in the South.
It happens up north,
It
but
happens
it's
everywhere.
not uncommon for it to be down here the most because the sweet Southern Belle, the Southern hospitality that everyone's sweet and nothing can go wrong, and it's just like, no, no, no.
Yes, yeah, for sure. Um, but I don't want to give a pass to all of the churches out there across the nation, because I think as a whole, as a community, like we said, the Black church is the pillar
Mhm.
of much of our communities, whether you're here in the Southeast region, or if you're in the North, if you're in the Midwest, if you're in the Southwest region, you're in the West Coast, Pacific Northwest, whatever, right? If you're in a Black church, you're not immune. Like these are, and there are certain Black churches that I consider more progressive. I know that in LA, Reverend Beckwith Church is super progressive. Love his community, but that doesn't mean that even a progressive church cannot cause harm, right?
Right.
And when we talk about the church causing harm, the church is comprised of members, and
Mhm.
so you know we want to understand that this is not a blame the church game. This is a look inside of your family, because if a major leader in a family causes harm and nobody comes to that person's aid, the family has caused harm.
Yep.
And so we gotta that this is part of that healing. It's like, okay, well, we need to, as you said, if you're a member of the church, and someone comes to you who has been harmed in whatever way that might be, then the biggest thing to do is start by listening. Start by listening and validating the person, and saying, "Hey, you're heard," you know. And then the next steps from there, that person, you can, as a person who's a listener, can go to someone who's a trusted leader,
Mhm.
and share with permission of the
Yeah.
person, right? With permission of the person, or take the person, go with the person, go
Person.
support the
Mhm.
person in the taking that next step, and so on and so forth. Yeah, because I'm sure members are like, well, if somebody, what do I do next? I think the first thing is to validate, and then the second thing is to find another trusted person who could be a little bit higher in leadership, and support that person who has come to you in going to that, if they want to,
Yeah.
and at the end of the day, encourage outside therapy, encourage outside professional help, encourage that, right? because sometimes you need an outside perspective to see the forest for the trees and to really get some distance for healing.
Or even have a network. Since it is a church, have a list of faith-based practitioners
Mhm.
that don't belong to the church, but can still keep you on your journey while you're doing your mental health at the same
Yeah,
time.
yeah, and it's a I think it's a time to start um, forming. If you and I know there's a lot of health ministries in churches, but like very specifically mental health ministries,
Mm-hmm.
apart from just the not just to minimize, but like only health ministries. A lot of times, health ministries will focus on physical health. Women's
Right.
ministries may focus on physical health, but like very specific mental health ministries.
Yeah.
Maybe if there's a women's health ministry and a men's health ministry, maybe there's a subgroup of the women's health ministry that is dedicated to mental health, women's mental health. And there's a subgroup of the men's ministry that is dedicated to men's mental health, right? And when we start to do that and have these conversations, we create safer spaces to really like, here's what's going on, right? Here's what's going
That
on.
could be great. That would be very productive because we know churches have those spaces. It's just not
Hmm.
that little subspace.
Right. And we got to be careful of this toxic positivity and spiritual bypassing,
Mm-hmm.
um, because even if you have a mental health ministry or spiritual, like a health, yeah, mental health ministry, if you're practicing in the church spiritual bypassing, which for those who don't know what that is, it's just pray about it.
Yeah,
Just make it, just make your connection with God stronger. Just pray about it. Praying about it is a useful tool, and sometimes it's not the only thing. And so we have to get out. This is why, again, we need to educate about trauma, because spiritual bypassing causes trauma.
I agree.
So, all right, we could continue to go down this
Rabbit
journey, this
hole.
rabbit hole. Woo! It has been a conversation, and I think that we've covered so much stuff. We've covered so much ground.
Yeah, I'm gonna say a little bit, a lot of it, and then this time we actually have a lot of feedback at the live at the same time. So yeah.
Yeah, so we appreciate those who have joined us live, those who have chimed in. We appreciate the comments that happen on the back end, questions that might come on the back end. I appreciate you, Mandy, for joining us today, and just like being part of this conversation, sharing your journey, sharing your expertise, and would love to have the listeners know, like, if they wanted to reach out to you for speaking, for counseling, for anything, you're about to start your private practice, how would they reach you? I
Yay!
know.
I'm nervous, but I'm excited. You can reach me, of course, on Instagram at Relatable Counselor. I do have that email tab and the link tree in my bio. Um, you can message me on Instagram. I will respond back, of course, via email. And then you can also find me on Facebook under my other platform, which is What Had Happened Was. You can always follow that and message me on there.
Oh, that's you.
Yes,
I've been
ma'am.
following, well, what had happened was, but I didn't realize that was you.
Yep, that's me.
Very cool. Very, very good content. So you heard her, and we're gonna have all of the deets in the show notes when the podcast comes out. While y'all don't, I don't think y'all know this. I'm as we do this live, we're on a summer break, and so for those of you who are coming in listening to the audio podcast, you'll be listening in season 4. We are about to go on. Can you believe it? Season 4. So stay tuned for those of you who might have revisit this conversation and listen again with different ears. This will be re-released in the fall for our season 4, with all the show notes, and by then you would have your practice up, so that would be awesome.
Yes.
And
Very,
for
very, very excited.
Yes. And for those of you who are listening live now or who are listening on the replay on YouTube or or Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn, um, go ahead and check out the Black Mind Garden podcast as well, so you can catch this again when we release it, and share this episode with a few other people, because I know this topic is a controversial
Mm-hmm.
and very needed topic. So thank you for being with me on this.
No, thank you for having me.
All right, y'all. Well, we will see you on the next episode. Go check out Mandii, the relatable counselor, and check her out on Facebook as what had happened. Well, what had happened was, and look out for her practice to get started. All right. Y'all have a
All
great rest of the day, and we'll see you on the next episode. Bye.